Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds, Edge to Edge Transformation. And transformation requires guardrails. Transformation requires that we take all the protections into account and ethics and all that. And that's why here in front of us is Tina Singh, one of the most compassionate attorneys that I've worked with when it came to startups. Tina, tell us a little bit about you. How did you become the Tina Singh that we know?
Well, first of all, Shankar, thank you so much for having me. I have so much respect for founders, and you raised a very good question. How did I end up being an attorney for startups? What's interesting is I actually originally wanted to be a psychologist or a counselor to help people. I've always wanted to help people, and I think I bring that with me to the table just as a lawyer for startups. I look at every single assignment as how can I help someone? The law, it can be very theoretical, it can be very confusing. There's a lot of different choices, but I always have in mind, how can I help the person that I'm interacting with? I got my start with a DC office of a large Wall Street law firm. Right out of law school, I was doing these $1 billion deals. They were very complex. I was, of course, the junior person on the deal, so I definitely know what it's like being the junior associate in a large law firm. It was a great experience because I learned sort of the gold-plated blue chip standard, which is always good to know as a baseline. I think it's excellent experience right out of law school to get that very high level of training. And after getting that training, I came to Silicon Valley. With startups, you can't really have 5 lawyers and a month and millions of dollars of legal fees. So you take that training and you have to sort of right size it for the startup.
We have experienced it firsthand. You literally saved one of our companies. And the way you did that was first, your fees at the time were very reasonable. And second, because you knew everything about M&A, you were able to do the M&A and take care of our existing investors, founders, and senior executives in a way that was really, truly remarkable. How do you keep up with all these technologies? The one time that we worked together in biotech, FarmQuest, I was really astounded how much you knew about technology law, software law, biotechnology law. How do you keep up with so many changing technologies?
It just boils down to a love of learning. In the tech world, everything changes all the time, and there's unlimited opportunities to learn. And I really embrace that, and I enjoy that. What happens is for a startup lawyer, you really do have to cover a lot of ground because a startup cannot, hire multiple lawyers. So I did have experience, about 4 solid years of experience of M&A, experience doing biotech work, tech work. I love taking on new responsibilities. So even in the large law firms that I was in, I not only was a corporate lawyer, but I embraced the chance to do software licensing and all of that. I took all those opportunities to learn as much as possible. That must have showed in the work that I did with your company. I believe that is what's required of a good startup attorney, is to be able to cover all those areas that a startup needs. That's how you're going to help a company progress.
And like you said earlier, there are things that are theoretical, and there's that vulnerability that any startup has because we don't always invent new things all the time. We are competing with large companies that have a portfolio of patents. What's the difference between the theoretical aspects of the law, especially IP protection, and the real practical use?
There is just a huge difference, and you always want to be practical. I think I get my practicality from just having done a number of transactions and knowing what occurs in the industry. And so just knowing what kinds of cases where you do have problems in litigation and where you don't have to worry, that can be very helpful, and I'd like to pass that on. Otherwise, every business has risk, but it's important to quantify what element is likely and what element is not.
That's where an experienced attorney versus somebody who is just starting makes a difference because you have seen it in real life. You also seen how people negotiate and how what could be a legal issue can be converted into a business transaction
I had one situation, we worked really hard on a distribution agreement with a very large company. And so in that case, you thought of it as a, us versus them situation. It was very detailed negotiations. After the draft was sent, the company sent an acquisition offer. They actually, within 2 months, bought the company. So it's a great example of how you might think someone's on the other side of the table or could compete with you, or you're negotiating against them, but really they see your value, and the next thing you know, you're acquired by them.
Today, we are again in a chaotic situation with AI, with machine learning, and with generative AI using huge amount of data that's out there with various authors and various sources. What's your view on what will come out of all this generative AI that will leverage a lot of things that are already existing with copyrights, with patents, with protections?
Well, it really is going to be the Wild West. You're right to make these comparisons. Right now, for example, we call companies AI companies, but in the future, we're probably going to drop the word AI, just like we used to call internet companies. My tip for founders in this kind of uncertain environment is a good attorney can actually give you advice on how to sort of structure your product roadmap to avoid what could be a likely scenario. So even though we don't know where the law is going in some respects, you can extrapolate where you think the law is going to go. And in some respects, that happens all the time with startups, not just with AI, but it's happened to me many times where I get a startup where there's no market that has ever existed for this. And so you don't know what the law is. The law applies to life. And so if the legal world has not even seen this business model before, you don't always know what the law is going to be. Silicon Valley moves much faster than people can make laws. But what you can do to protect yourself as a founder is to consider what you think the law is going to be and to build around that. Because what you don't want to do is to have that uncertainty affect your product later on, where you've done something where it's not legal. One example would be Napster, and there's other examples where people get really excited, but then later on you find out that it's not exactly legal. In the AI world, there's lots of possibilities where some of the business models we're seeing right now may not be permissible in the future. We do have good underpinnings right now on where the law could be. We have extensive data protection laws. We have extensive privacy laws. We have intellectual property laws like copyright laws. It's my understanding that recently a copyright claim was rejected because a portion of the work was generated with AI. So in that case, the protection itself was rejected. These are all very evolving standards right now. But what you want to do is at least, look at some of these frameworks and say, am I violating someone's privacy? Does someone else own this? Did I get appropriate consent? I think with AI right now, the companies that did a good job getting consent, and I might just call out Google as an example. Google has very well done and extensive consents throughout its entire ecosystem. And so some of the elements that they use, they feel comfortable that they've gotten at least some decent paperwork on that. In terms of startups, that could be more challenging, getting all your consents in place, making sure that whatever the existing laws at least are followed and as extrapolated on where you want to go.
And one of the things that entrepreneurs really worry about, and I remember worrying about it in my first startup, was what's called piercing the corporate veil,
Yes.
which means that I may do something wrong, like we've seen in the crypto world with Sam. There's this belief that the corporate entity is the only thing that will be affected, but there are laws that will actually not protect the individual. And besides the corporation, will come to the individual to haunt them. So, how would we distinguish between these categories, and what's the litmus test? As somebody never been in the legal profession, how should entrepreneurs protect themselves in the absence of having all the legal advice?
That's an excellent question. Two very good examples, Elizabeth Holmes, FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried. So in those cases, what has been alleged is a criminal violation. It's important to note that a criminal violation, it's going to be tough to hide behind the corporate entity because some of it is going to be viewed as not being as part of what you did in the corporation. It's always important to keep ethics in mind. That's a good sort of North Star to go by, where founders could keep in mind and ask themselves, does this sound right or not? And then secondly, to work within the corporation itself. And I think it's also important to have those checks and balances and the rest of the individuals in the corporations. What you see in some of these high profile cases is a little bit of secrecy where others don't know about what's going on, where it's just a handful of individuals who hold that power and have that visibility. That can sometimes lead to being tempted to go the wrong way. Honestly, when you have a corporate setting and you've got checks and balances within the corporation, you've got the officers, the directors, the shareholders, and transparency. If you follow some of those sort of pre-structured rules, most people stay safe within that because a corporation is meant to protect you.
Right behind you, I see Mount Everest. And one of the reasons why startups or even entrepreneurs, people within corporations, start new initiatives is because they want to scale new heights. But along with scaling new heights, there is always that danger of slipping, falling, failing. Have you worked with companies that failed? What, as an attorney, was your role in supporting them go through the challenges that come with failure?
Well, that's an excellent question. I feel very lucky that the last few years, I haven't had to close a company. I try to guide companies where we manage to always find some sort of sale or solution. My one tip there is, if you're bright, if you have a great team, sometimes you can still find value in the assets and the team and make a go of it. It has been a long time since I've had to shut down a company. It's a tough experience. And as an attorney, you want to do all that you can to make sure that a company succeeds.
The legal and the business, how do they kind of enmesh with each other?
They do super mesh together. Most startups have a first-time CEO. You don't really see Bill Gates as a CEO of another startup. So usually the founders might have a very senior role in another company, but not the CEO role. Because I've worked with so many CEOs in so many different settings, I see the same issues over and over again. And I'm happy to pass on that advice. People really appreciate that. I also see different industries, different ways of doing things, structuring, equity structures and such. So I'm so happy to pass that along. And first-time CEOs are very grateful for that. Honestly, they've never gone through this before.
In what ways has technology helped or hindered you as an attorney and the people that you worked with?
Generative AI is ripe for use by attorneys. And it's interesting because attorneys can use it and also the public can use it. They're structured in a different way in terms of how those are presented and the quality of what is presented. We've had automated tools for quite some time now. There's Rocket Lawyer, Atlas, Clerky, even in the back of an airline magazine, you'll see a $50 incorporation. So there's always these automated and low-cost tools. For many companies, it might be okay that you just go with the automated systems. For startups that are looking for angel and venture-backed investment to scale, it's very important to get it done right. If you don't, then just fixing that in terms of what it's going to take, what it's going to show for your level of sophistication can be challenging. I'm a big fan of at least having an attorney in there somewhere. Like, you can use some of these automated tools, but some of them have these choices that can be challenging to pick the right one. So I have seen instances where even very sophisticated tools have been used, but one or two pieces are off. It takes some time to change that. They're meant for efficiency. I don't think we're there in terms of full reliance. On the other hand, they're also helpful for lawyers. We've been using these tools for many years, and I look forward to seeing, how they develop over time to help us.
Another area where many people tend to skim
Yeah.
is to go with an attorney that's recommended by their investors. They think, why have a separate attorney? I have great investors and I completely trust them. What's the problem with that kind of a scenario?
And it raises an interesting concept of who does the attorney represent? And as a corporate attorney, there's almost built-in conflicts there in some way or the other. So I'll give you the technical answer. The attorney is supposed to take direction and advice from the senior most level officer. And in most cases, that's the CEO. And in most cases for a startup, that's the founder. Of course, many attorneys also work with investors regularly. They might be friends. It's tempting. You want to look after your friends as well. So there's a lot of different people involved. And technically, the attorney just represents the corporation and has to look out for the best interests of the corporation. How that can show can vary. Some attorneys are a bit more pro-founder. Some are a bit more pro-investor. I like to look at it as what is best for the company. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for founders. They work so hard, they put so much on the line, they're so passionate that I feel like helping the company is also making sure that the founder is motivated and is properly aligned.
What advice do you have for budding lawyers or lawyers in mid-career going through all these transitions?
Learn as much as possible. A mid-stage lawyer, you're still looking to get the best experience that you can. It's hard to just go out there on your own if you don't have the right experience. In some fields, you need a higher level of background knowledge before you can continue. That is definitely the case for corporate law. So what's interesting is most of law school is geared towards litigation. It's what we think of as lawyers going to court. But corporate law, representing startups and such, that is transactional. And there's very little in law school that is geared towards that. So all that training tends to come best from actual practice, from sort of the most sophisticated practice and experience you can get. And so that would be my advice for mid-stage attorneys, especially in the tech and corporate and startup fields. Litigation is a whole nother ballgame, but if you're a mid-stage attorney, keep learning, be the best that you can be before you go without the senior level attention in representing a startup.
And how about new lawyers starting in the legal profession?
So new lawyers starting in the legal profession, again, I'm going to be more transactional and corporate and startup focused. It is a high learning curve. And so you want to be in a situation where you have a very good mentor, where you are learning from the best. And that's where go with a firm that's doing a lot of work in a field that you really like so that you can get enough of that real experience. And that's how you're going to do well. So if you go to a company that actually doesn't do the work that you like, it's going to be hard to learn that on your own.
And is it necessary for lawyers to be able to scale mountains and climb like you have done in the past?
Well, that's so interesting. The mountain is really for the startup. The startup wants to scale. All of these analogies work so well with Mount Everest. But the other interesting thing is with startups, you need the hockey stick also, right? You need to not just get to the foothill, but you need to be able to show an investor that you can reach very high levels. And it's really the founder who's doing the legwork. And I'm sort of like the Sherpa. I'm helping carrying the baggage, saying, I've been here before, avoid this, avoid that, carry some extra oxygen. So I think a lot of these analogies work well.
I still remember the way you were a great Sherpa and reminding us to have enough oxygen before we rush into the next deal. So thank you again. And to everybody out there, I'm looking for divergent views, different aspects, because everything around us is changing, not just technology. The legal framework is changing. So please come forward. I want to hear from you. I want our audience to hear from you, because in working together, we can piece together what the future looks like. No one has a crystal ball. Thanks again, Tina, for continuing to be a compassionate lawyer.
Well, thank you so much, Shankar. It's been a pleasure.